In this video, we're gonna talk about pawns, but again, not as broad as I mentioned in the previous video. This one is gonna be more like double pawns. We talked about, weak pawns, around the king, but we haven't really talked about double pawns. So, for example, double pawns are not really, to give you an example, this is actually, like a practical example. This is very well known opening, the riddle pass, where you could play bishop b5. And typically, this is a Berlin defense, very major opening, major line, though, in the riddle pass. So, white could do this, right? And black could do this. You could see if we open up the computer, black doesn't mind this. Like, the computer doesn't really feel like this is bad or anything. This idea here was pawn takes, and it makes sense to take this way. You could also take the other way, but it does make a lot of sense to take that way. It connects the two bishops, right? The two bishops could develop easier. The queen is also already have like an open file that almost feels like the queen is like a rook activity. So the bishop could move. The bishop could move anywhere. There's more diagonals to move. The pawn also contribute toward the center. Also this one. So it's good idea. So double pawns in general are not bad thing. They could actually help in your game. So this is not a really bad thing. If the pawn structure, if the pawns are toward the toward the center, this is okay to allow. There are some people that I know they don't play this opening because they feel like, well, I don't like double pawns. I don't know what to do. Double pawns are not necessarily a bad thing. You could see that in this specific structure, the queen has an open file for now. By the way, this is not, this is a line where you could deal with this one. This is not like a free pawn. But the point is here, you could take this way. You get really active. The bishops and the pawns, bishops and the queen and the pawns are contributing toward the center, right? Now, there's another opening, right? It's something that I have students play. I mean, depends on their level. This is actually the London, right? And this one is very strong. Let's say they play here, and let's say they play like c3. I'm just giving bunch of lines here. This move order may not matter. I mean, this a6, I don't even know. Let's say they play b6. It's a goofy London, but you get the idea, though. I'm trying to just explain the point. Let's say this, let's say here. You can play this kind of stuff. I mean, this is actually good for, white is pretty good here. I'm just giving random moves just to explain my point. What happens if this were to happen here? Bishop d6. Bishop d6 here, the point in this kind of structure, what do you think? Is bishop takes d6 good, bad? Pause the video, think about it. Because this is a potential of double pawns, right? So you could argue that bishop g3 is a good idea. I mean, we're going to talk about this like the next move. But the point is, if you were to take here, I would say, opening up the computer for a second, this is not good. Not really good. The computer doesn't like it, and it likes this one. Now, the difference between both moves, let me explain. Just need to explain so you get the idea. When you take on here, you're basically giving, it's equivalent to like towards the center. It's actually more here, more visibly strong than the one on the Rillo pass, the line that we were looking at like a minute ago. This one is really huge. I mean, you can see the computer is like, it went down because this position is good for white, but it liked this trade for black, right? So the point here, this pawn has, contributing towards the center in a big time. Like this is actually, the pawn is going this way, the pawn is going this way. Maybe black has more control. And usually in this line, somehow black would get like maybe queen e7, knight d7, and he plays towards the center, e5. And then it becomes really complicated for the people that play the London, right? It becomes like black is so active. Once he starts playing e5, he cannot play e5 right now, but he has to prepare it. Maybe he could castle, then queen e7, knight d7, e5. And then even though the pawn at d5 is blocking access to bishop b7, this is like the moves that I was doing, but that's not the point. The point is actually the double pawn. I'm not talking about the position right now. I'm talking about this pawn's, this pawn on d6, a double pawn. Is it good or bad? So the point is, this opens up also for the rook. So this means the rook could go to c8. It potentially semi-open files are good. Open files are good for the rook, so that opens up for the rook and also contributing towards the center. Now, people assume that like it's automatic thing that people would always stick with the piece. Yeah, I mean, most of the time you would have to stick with the piece. Like if the queen is on d8, it makes sense to take, right, to develop your queen, but not necessarily. I mean, you do have to remember that the queen could develop later. So it's like you move pawns, you move knights, you develop knights, you develop bishops, and then the queen has to move, but it doesn't have to move right away. It depends on the opening, depends on the structure. So you could delay queen takes in general. Like you don't automatically have to assume that it has to be queen takes. Queen takes is good for white, right? And the problem is here, it's white still maintaining the center, right? So this is still like within his control. You might do like something like here and some kind of f4. And it becomes a little bit interesting. This kind of stuff could happen in the London, right? But when you take this way, you don't have 95, you don't have anything at all. Like you're being restricted from moving to e5, for example, right? So the difference is huge. Now you could argue that what happens if I were to do like this couple moves, right? You could argue that what happens if I just castle, right? This is actually playable, right? This is not a good thing. You can see the computer went up, Hivel bar. And that's also with the same concept that we control the center. It's equivalent to this pawn being on d6. So it's okay to allow this. And as a matter of fact, if you have to play f5, depending on, how if there's an attack here, maybe it's potential f5. But if this pawn at f4, it does give you a little bit of a control towards the center. Sometimes people play g3 and knight e5, and this is actually huge for white. Like black becomes passive. You could also argue that this move could also be played. Because if you take here, maybe you could play here. That opens up for the rook, and also maybe you could castle here, knight e5, and potentially g4, g5, or f4, g4. So double pawns, you could see in these situations are okay. The only time that double pawns, and there are weird exceptions though, in the ending games, and this is like a different topic. There are weird exceptions where maybe in the ending games, double pawns could be okay. Most of the time, it depends on the game, depends on the structure and the position and the opening. But like for example, I could think about Semislav, the double pawns at some point they are maybe double pawns depending on the line, and they could be really dangerous because they are actually so passed, like pass pawns, right? So it's okay. It depends on the position. It's not necessarily based on like this. There are some guidelines, but there's always ways you could move around. Like double pawns are not always bad. But they are probably bad when they are on the corner. Let's say you have double pawns around here. They're not really contributing to do anything, right? Maybe, perhaps, or around here. Double pawns. I mean, double pawns here opens up for the rook, though, if you're able to do this. But if double pawns around here, like we have a pawn at h3, if we put the pawn from here to here, you can see this is actually, it opens up for here, but if you get a castle, the double pawns here feels like it's not a good thing for white. It just feels like you're down a pawn maybe, without really doing anything. You cannot really push it if your pawn is on h3. H4 is just weakening up your king maybe. So that the point is, double pawns are not necessarily bad. This is like gives you a good idea of like how you could apply. And if you know this very well, if you know this concept very well, knowing that bishop d6 is not a big deal, I could just develop a bishop. Stellar told me this. It's backed by the computer. I'm gonna play this in a lot of my games, right? So if you apply this knowledge to your games, it would help you. Again, this is only one thing. This is not tactics. This is still positional ideas, right? But something that you could learn from. If you could apply it in your game, and it's usually could happen a lot. I mean, always happens in the London opening, and it's easy concept to understand. So hopefully you guys understand this one. Hopefully it's gonna help you in 2026. And stay tuned for more videos with more ideas. Thank you for tuning in, folks.